Welcome to This Jungian Life. Three good friends and Jungian analysts, Lisa Marciano, Deborah Stewart, and Joseph Lee, invite you to join them for an intimate and honest conversation that brings a psychological perspective to important issues of the day.
I'm Lisa Marciano, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Philadelphia.
I'm Joseph Lee, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
I'm Deborah Stewart, a Jungian analyst on Cape Cod.
So did you guys hear that Mattel is coming out with a new Barbie?
No.
Really?
Yeah, it's going to be Jungian analyst Barbie.
Oh my God.
And she's going to be a slightly out of shape middle-aged woman. With lots of like flowing clothes.
And a big
Scarves.
library behind her.
And like jewel tones.
Jewel tones,
Right.
absolutely.
And the setup comes with like a bookcase. Yeah.
Right, and stacks of legal pads to write on.
It doesn't sound like very much fun.
Doesn't sound exciting, but it is realistic.
But there will be a lot of scarves she can change into.
I like it. Maybe a little mini sand tray in the back of the office. and a fainting couch, so a bit of Freudian work there.
Right. Somebody should definitely make that. Anyway, today, because we received so many requests for this, we're going to talk about the movie Barbie. And I will say that we often get requests to talk about movies on the podcast, and I usually don't put them forward because, well, first of all, podcasts about films, it's kind of like, are people going to want to listen to it if they haven't seen the film? But also because I pretty much never leave my house. And talking about the film would require me to see it, which I did this week. I was the person there with the notepad at Barbie at the 6:40 showing.
Taking notes. As if she were a client.
Exactly.
I like that.
Exactly.
Exactly.
There I was. Right. So yes, we all did our homework and saw the movie, and we are going to talk about it because I can't tell you how many people asked us to. So you asked and we listened. So here goes.
Yes. I want to note for the record that I did not take notes. I ate popcorn because that's what you do at the movies.
Absolutely.
That was in the spirit of the thing.
And what I'd like to say for those who might be sensitive is there are probably some spoiler alerts. So we're going to be talking freely about the plot of the movie, and if you plan to see it beforehand, you might want to pause this and come back after you've seen the movie. So, the movie opens, and just as I saw my sisters back there in the 70s and 60s, Barbie world in all its pink plastic splendor has been reproduced. And one thing that everyone has agreed on is that the sets were phenomenal, and none of them were CGI.
Really?
That all of them were built. That this is the artistry in making all of that is probably going to win an award. So that part of it's remarkable.
Well, the very opening scene before we get to Barbie Land is that, to my mind, hilarious spoof on 2001.
Yes.
And that is actually not that scene, but it is historical fact that prior to Barbie, the advent of Barbie, little girls got to play with baby dolls, little girl dolls, or you could get dress-up costume dolls that you didn't really play with. They kind of sat on the shelf. That there would be a special doll that had a certain kind of costume on, that if you played with them, you would have ruined their clothes. So they were decorative. I'm obviously dating myself. I didn't get to play with Barbie, but I did think the opening scene was hilarious, and so did everybody else in the theater that I was in. And it's a real revolution. In the first year, Mattel sold 300,000 Barbie dolls in 1959.
Wow.
And then all the stuff you were talking about, Joseph, of Plastic Land, obviously there's been a cascade of product ever since.
Well, I just want to say about that, Deb. I agreed with you. I thought that scene was funny, and I also thought, oh my God, that's really true, isn't it? That more or less before Barbie, it was just baby dolls. So this was this new kind of paradigm for femaleness or something. However, the film makes it out to be the case that Barbie brought all of these different options for little girls, but that's not actually accurate. The first Barbies, for however many years, I didn't do my research on this, they were really just bimbos. They really did just dress up in pretty clothes, and you had lots of different outfits. And this was the stage that I was playing with Barbie. I mean, there was no like astronaut Barbie, it was just, there was Barbie, there was her little teal colored car. There were lots of clothes, and, maybe that there was a Ken in the picture. But Barbie didn't do anything, interesting with herself. She just was sort of like Margot Robbie. She just was, went around looking pretty. By the way, if I recall correctly, and this may be I may have misremembered it, but I think my sister was the one that had all the Barbies, and I was deemed too little to have them. They were sort of special, and it was not really clear that I was going to take care of them, so I coveted my sister's Barbies, and I don't think my memory is that I never got any of my own, but that's probably a sort of a childhood
trauma.
Thank you. But yeah, so just the important thing though is like the alternative to being a mother was actually you can be this bimbo.
Well, let's think about that. And I have been thinking about it, of what is the myth of Barbie. And I'm pinging off you saying you were deemed too young to play with Barbie, which makes me remember this birthday party that our granddaughter had. And I can't remember if it was her third or fourth birthday party, but let's say she was 4. And everybody brought these wonderful sort of educative, really great gifts of, art type stuff and whatever else. And it was all really great. Lots of adults, kids. And then Ivy opened up a Barbie. And all those little girls homed in on her and vied to play with that Barbie. That was the hot item at that birthday party, and they were little. And we've talked about this for years, of all the stuff at that birthday party, that it was Barbie that captured the imagination of every little girl there. So that tells me there's something much more than Barbie being a bimbo. And I mean, these are just little kids, so they don't know now that Barbie can be an Olympic skier and an Air Force pilot and a surgeon and a baseball player.
And a Jungian analyst.
All they see is this skinny little doll. And it captured their imagination. And I think it's fascinating that this skinny little doll and what you can do with her, basically all you can do with her is change her clothes. But it appeals to something in a child's psyche to be able to do that.
Well, talking about that first scene again, So there's this a prehistoric landscape that's somewhat dystopian, and there are these little girls that are drably clothed, and they're playing with baby dolls, and they are reproducing kind of 1940s, 1950s household tasks with
ironing,
plastic irons and other things. And they all look sad and kind of undervitalized, overworked 4-year-old girls. And then there's this epic music comes on, and then a 100-foot Barbie, who is in that moment a goddess. We're talking about an archetypal event.
Yes.
And she's there in her bathing suit, and she's spectacularly pristine and beautiful in that kind of 40s, 50s, 60s starlet kind of role, that Marilyn Monroe-ish role. And one of the archetypal conflicts that I see, I would say, has to do with the Trojan War and the myth of the Trojan War.
Where you're going with this,
yes.
But I can't wait to hear it.
Sure. So, Eris creates the golden apple of discord, and Zeus takes it and goes among the goddesses and brings them all together, and then calls Paris, this handsome young man, and says, I want you to award this apple to the most appealing, most beautiful of all the goddesses. And in the myth, he goes between the different goddesses, who each promise him favors and value. Hera says that she can make his life remarkably successful and grant him all manner of social status. Each of the goddesses come forward. And then Aphrodite says, I will promise you love in a way that you could never imagine. And so the apple goes to Aphrodite. And so what we see in that opening scene is that Aphrodite receives the golden apple, and then the Trojan War begins in a manner of saying, because the little girls, now inspired by some kind of archetypal force, take those baby dolls and crash their skulls, actually murder the baby dolls. So it's actually a really disturbing, this like infanticide is like symbolically enacted.
No, you found it disturbing, Lisa and I Lisa and I thought it was funny.
I suppose. But it started with the supremacy of Aphrodite.
Yeah.
She came onto the scene and changed what was going to dominate the vision of what it meant to be a woman. And of course, we've had that author Arlene Landau on to talk about this, but the costs of the veneration of Aphrodite.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
So motherhood is swept aside. Mothers as a role are dismissed. And Aphrodite, in all her pristine, exquisite pinkness, and hearts and harp shapes and Cupid and actually Ken is basically Cupid, this sexless child who flies around. And they even have them shooting arrows at a certain point, toy arrows on the beach. And this is the world.
He's an accessory.
Yeah.
Yes. But this is Aphrodite's world. Yeah.
Yes, where men are accessories. That's really interesting, Joseph. And just to further your point a little bit, there's the pregnant Barbie, which I didn't know that she existed, but they made something out of that. Yeah.
And she did not last long.
And in the film, they're kind of disgusted by her.
Well, it is. I actually saw some images of pregnant Barbie online. And it really is kind of disgusting, actually. There's a little magnet-shaped belly with a little teeny-weeny baby inside, and it does not fit with the myth of Aphrodite that you were pointing out, Joseph, which I think is right on. Barbie does not grow up. Barbie is eternally beautiful. Barbie has an endless array of clothes, an endless array of campers, houses, heaven only knows what else. And she now has an endless array of possibilities for what she will do with her life. And being pregnant is not one of them.
Besides, it's very hard to get pregnant. It's very hard to get pregnant if you don't have a vagina.
Yes, that was one of the declarations, actually. When Barbie shows up in the real world, and these men are heckling her, she's like, and by the way, neither of us have genitals, so you can all run off there. But that's an interesting evolution archetypally, that she first shows up as Aphrodite, as this icon of feminine beauty in that archetype. And then over time, what occurs is the other goddesses demand space. So all of a sudden, Artemis or Athena comes in and says, hey, wait a minute. What about women who are lawyers? Because Artemis was the goddess of law.
There's a Barbie judge.
Right. Exactly. What about women who are in authority, which is Hera starts to kind of move in. The archetype of women in authority. And then in the movie, there's even the Barbie who's had been drawn on her hair.
The weird Barbie.
Weird Barbie.
Who's sort of like Shadow.
Yes.
Oh,
and
exactly.
She's kind of Baba Yaga. She's kind of Baobo. But these other feminine archetypes finally slowly find their way forward, even though they were banished in the beginning.
I really like that a lot, and Diana shows up, the goddess of hunting, and you can be a Barbie scuba diver and a Barbie army officer and a Barbie jet plane pilot and an Olympic skier. I mean, you're absolutely right that this panoply of goddesses and what they represent is now available.
Right, and the goddess who is banished is Hestia. And who is the goddess of the hearth.
Yeah.
And that aspect of the feminine that is invisible in service to her children. And in that first scene, it's no way Hestia. And interestingly, in mythology, Hestia abandons her seat in Mount Olympus in favor of Dionysus. So, which I think is part of that archetypal signal that the keeper of the hearth fire, the mother who tends the hearth, is moving out of the collective, that it's losing focus in the emerging psyche.
Wouldn't you say, I mean, I think that's really interesting. Wouldn't you also say that Demeter was banished? I mean, Demeter doesn't show up in that pantheon too, right?
To me, Demeter is the mother of life. She's not so much the mother that's in the house. Demeter is not the mother who's cooking at the hearth and changing diapers. She's the principle of life that makes spring occur, that makes the trees fruit. More primal, and I think more universal. The hearth is something that's uniquely human.
Okay.
You know, trees don't build hearths. Bees don't build hearths.
Yeah, but we definitely do have Hera and power, and Athena, who was goddess of strategy and had a lot of military power and skill, but a very intellectual Barbie. And there is a judge and a news anchor, and
there's still a D cup, but yes, very intellectual.
Right.
They're still all beautiful in the Barbie world, in the initial Barbie world. But the other goddesses will not be denied, which is rather remarkable, I think.
Yeah. I've been thinking of this as a sort of in the context of another myth, which is the Adam and Eve story. And in that story, where Adam is created first, or at least one version of it, and then Eve is created as his helpmate and out of one of Adam's ribs. In this creation myth, Barbie comes first. Ken wasn't added. I think it was a year or so later that Ken came along. So this is, and in the movie, the same thing is true. That Ken wants to hang out with Barbie and says, "Can I come over tonight?" And she basically says, "Yeah, sure, come on over, everybody. I'm having a party, and you can come to the party."
Mm-hmm.
And it's very clear that this is a female world where the Kens are adjuncts, afterthoughts.
It's that 10, 11-year-old world of, I don't know if that's grade school or middle school, where there's still a lot of ambivalence that getting a kiss from a boy is a yucky thing. And that has to be put aside, and the girls are in their own tribe having fun and celebrating and just not concerned about sexuality and eroticism. It's just not interesting until perhaps later on.
Yeah, it's their own world of fantasy. Of endless possibility, and that everything is fine. There are no limits.
Right, the Puella joyous place.
And I think about it as a sort of pre-puberty world, but right on that cusp. And innumerable authors have written about the stage that girls have as kids of, that I can ride a scooter and I can race my bike and I can do all kinds of things, and that then when adolescence comes along and puberty really takes hold, that there's a dampening of that sense of possibility and freedom and personhood for something that is more sort of traditionally female role oriented. And so I can see Barbie as that place of absolute utter freedom.
Yeah, it's a very young place, isn't it?
Very young place. And that you change, the point is you change Barbie's clothes. That was my favorite line in the movie. At one point, Barbie says something like, let's go home and change clothes. It was like, but we talk about persona, and we telegraph what our persona is, as you pointed out, Lisa, with your Jungian analyst doll, through our clothes and through our hairstyle and all that kind of thing. And I can imagine little girls trying on all kinds of personas, the surgeon persona and the wildlife conservationist persona and the vet and the rock star. And the list is absolutely endless. And I can vicariously imagine my way into all these possibilities.
And I think that's in the movie, the defense of the Barbie paradigm was there was a stage when even play, and play is such an important role, and as psychoanalysts, we know so much about play as an essential ground for establishing the breadth and depth of the imagination, and also the place where archetypes begin to emerge spontaneously. So for little girls and little boys, to be able to extend their imagination into all kinds of interesting areas and to pretend and to play begins to create images, and images give rise to options. So I suspect it had a remarkably important process. And interestingly, as my sisters were playing with Barbie dolls, the only doll I had was a G.I. Joe. That was the only kind of sanctioned thing that little boys could play were military figures. And I had boxes of little plastic soldiers with all kinds of different military regalia and guns, and we would stage little wars, back in the woods. Although it was so interesting because in my generation, we really we fit between all of the wars. I mean, I was never exposed to the draft. The conflict in Iraq, I was too old. The conflicts, in
Vietnam was going on when you were a kid, though.
But I was a baby. I mean, none of this actually could take hold of me. That's what I mean. That my generation was never pushed into war. That it was always kind of almost a mythology that had happened before me and a mythology that happened after me.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see how that the image of the soldier was the only thing that was available to us as boys if we were going to play in that fashion.
Yeah, so
other kinds
got
of
Aphrodite
play
for girls and Ares for boys.
You've got it. That's exactly where I was going. And they are the archetypal pair. No one, of course, is thinking about this consciously, but it makes sense in that universal way. And it's been going on for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So it isn't actually unique that Aphrodite and Ares would be surging in a culture at a particular time.
And it's so I'm so glad that you jumped in and framed that for us right away, because so like there's different ways to talk about this, right? Like I hear you say I only had a G.I. Joe, and I'm like, oh, poor Joseph, little boy Joseph. I just want to go back in time and give you a teddy bear or something. But,
I did have a teddy bear. That's true.
but there's the sense about what part of sort of the role models offered to children through play and through toys winds up being kind of formative and shaping a child. In other words, what part of constrictive gender roles wind up being cultural. And then there's, this very thorny question of, is any of that innate? But you're bringing in something very different, which is it archetypal?
That these patterns are a priori. And this may have also signaled evolution, particularly in Western culture, that it may have been that Hera or Hestia held a different place in the collective psyche, and so little girls playing with hearth fire images rose even spontaneously in the collective, and that finished up. Even in architecture, in the 1950s and 60s, kitchens started shrinking in homes. Like I have a home that's built in 1961, and this is a home with 3 bedrooms. The kitchen is a tiny little galley, because in the world of the future, cooking and kitchen work was supposed to disappear.
That was before Martha Stewart brought Hestia back.
Which is exactly archetypal. But you could see how it was disappearing from the culture. Interestingly so, and rightly so, that other things were becoming more important.
But, I'm thinking about your question, Lisa, of, is it inherent? Is it cultural? I mean, that's a sticky wicket, and there's no, definitive answer. But Ares, the god of war, is mated with Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty. So, these kinds of mythologies and archetypes don't come from nowhere.
And that's missing in the Barbie movie. That what we see is Aphrodite and Cupid. That the men are little Cupid figures that are silly and goofy and playful and not sexually developed, like children, the children of Aphrodite. And there is no sense of that mature masculine.
Or mature feminine.
Or mature feminine. It's also very young.
Yeah. So that lends us into, sort of after Barbie and Ken get out into the so-called real world. And, all of the Kens stage their rebellion and become really misogynistic, oppressive, patriarchal stinkers. That is, in the movie, the antidote to all the Kens just being accessories and little boys and absolute lightweights. It's as if this is going to the other polarity, which of course it is not. That is not an image of the mature masculine either.
But let's go back for a second, but there is a more wonderful moment which starts the entire journey, which is that Barbie is in the midst of this dancing, sparkling, joyous, young place, and then she suddenly blurts out, "But I've been thinking about death lately," and this remarkable existential, alarm goes off, and it resounds through the entire psyche. I mean, if we think of the movie like a dream, even a child's dream, and you as mothers, what was it like when your child first discovered something can die? That it was a moment in all of our psychological developments and in the development of our children, that things actually die. And there is something about, in a way, a change. I wouldn't say it's the end of childhood, but something changes when you realize that things can die.
What comes up for me more is that moment, and I remember it in my own life of going to junior high, of that what died was childhood. That's what died.
So maybe it's a foreshadowing of that. Yeah.
And those were the days junior high was grade 7 through 9.
Yeah.
And I discovered, not that I would have been able to say it or even think it then, that I had a choice between being sort of a renegade, free spirit, do anything I wanted, and belonging and being a girl. And my moment of revelation was saving up for a Loden coat. And they had wooden toggles with special loops. And everybody who was anybody had a Loden coat. And I was saving up my babysitting money, and I bought one, and it was on sale. And it was red. And that was so wrong. Loden coats came in several different colors, but not red. And so, however, I kept trying, and girls bonded and banded together, and there were very definite rules about this new pubertal female sisterhood. And so going back to, what you were saying, Joseph, I think what dies is girlhood. And that's what happens in the movie. Barbie grows up.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, when she's in the real world and she's sitting next to an elderly woman,
yes,
who may in fact wind up being Jungian analyst Barbie, but this old gray woman with, gray hair and all these wrinkles and everything. she's looking at her, and I'm laughing because it's just absurd to be thinking this deeply about this little fluffy piece of cinema, but straining to apply an archetypal lens to it. What came up for me is the story of the Buddha when he leaves the palace for the first time and encounters illness and old age and death. And, Barbie kind of has those moments. It's like, oh, you can grow old. Oh, things can die. Oh, the world is not as beautiful and pristine and is not going to go on forever and ever and ever in this beautiful way that it has been.
Yeah. And that's the Garden of Eden again. That in the Garden of Eden, today we'll go out and pick strawberries. Tomorrow, let's go get some blueberries. The day after that, and that's the way it is in Barbie Land. Every day is wonderful.
Right, there's no development.
There's no development.
Which is so present in the fact that she cannot eat anything. That scene where, which was surprisingly affecting. There was something jarring because, of course, the actress looks like a living person. She's pouring make-believe milk, and she's pretending that she might eat a muffin or something, and just that feeling like she can't take anything in.
Yeah,
which is part of this idea that that's one of the ways that nothing will change. That everything is encapsulated in a kind of perfection, but it's encapsulated in this fantasy.
I just want to say, Joseph, just because you brought it up, I thought Margot Robbie was fantastic. I mean, I found myself actually caring about what happened to her. And I was like, just really, really wonderful performance.
Part of what I think is playing out was also Pinocchio. That it's that marvelous story, which we have resonated with for hundreds of years, about something inanimate that becomes ensouled and then goes through this journey of becoming human. And even the final scene where the creator of the Barbie doll, Ruth, takes Barbie's hands in this ensouling process, which is exactly what happens with the blue fairy in Pinocchio, that this magical spirit brings the doll to life, and then the doll finally experiences its vulnerabilities and depth of feeling, and the fact that Pinocchio really loves Geppetto, and also that he's vulnerable.
Yes,
it's that archetype which is so powerful. Leans into this story. And
Joseph,
on some level we recognize
this movie.
Well, there's anytime something captures the collective, because this has really taken off.
Absolutely.
There's always archetypal themes in it. It can't just be a cultural echo chamber. There's something else going on that makes people have to look twice. Like, what's happening here? But of course, it's all unconscious. But I think that thinking about it as a Pinocchio story makes it really interesting.
Yeah, it does. It does. That really works.
How does one come to life?
So I just want to say, because we've sort of danced around like the really juicy thing here, which is this, kind of what does it say about women and men and their relationship and the kind of controversy that a lot of people are talking about. But I want to tie that to the point that you just made, that because it touches into archetypal themes, we feel activated by it. We may not even know what exactly is activating us, right? What's on the surface is, misandry, misogyny, whatever. But we actually might be responding deeply just to the fact that these are very ancient themes.
Exactly.
I mean, yeah.
I felt like to be honest, that the archetypal themes were very much alive in the story, and that when the word patriarchy and all of this political rhetoric was laid on top of it, that it was, it felt like strange clothing on something that was much more profound. It felt very tangential, as something much deeper was actually trying to happen. And also there was a parallel process, which has to do with boys and girls, of course, that Barbie was going through her own incarnating process that looks like a certain thing, and the boys were going through their own incarnating process that looks like something else. So for Ken to go to the real world and discover that men actually like each other, which wasn't true in Barbie world. They were just bullying each other all the time in these like one-dimensional personalities, but that men actually could get together in a group, cheer each other on, admire each other, that all of that was missing. And that the boys' psyches had to also learn, we can all get together and play. We can all get together and actually go over to the house together and play music and even put our chests out and pretend that we're more than we are because we're boys, and put on costumes and march around, which is also a legitimate part of, you've both raised boys, that trying on different costumes, as Ken did, as all the boys did. And I call them boys because clearly they're boys.
Yeah.
And then we have a bit of Peter Pan there, where there's different costumes and different games. And even the war scene, playing at war, and playing at competing for female attention. And that's just as legitimate as Barbie and the other Barbies going through a developmental process where they wake up to themselves and their capacities and their individuality. And both are required, and that's where I think on an archetypal level, both of those things happen, secondary to whatever the commentary is by the narrator. Both the males and females go through a developmental process. And then there's another film laid over it, which is more of a scolding, scornful voice that is more of the voice of the times rather than the voice of the deep.
That's great. That's really perfect. That's great. I love that. Yeah, I mean, I think that's true, that the stuff about the patriarch. First of all, I just a confession here, I hate that word. Because what do we mean by it? You know, people throw it around, and people throw it around in the culture and on Twitter and in Jungian analytic circles. I mean, it's in, you know, it's in a lot of books, and it didn't used to bother me, but now it just I think, well, what does it mean? Well, like, what are we talking about actually with that? I don't know what that word means. It invokes the archetype of the father. You know, patriarchy comes from the Latin word patria for you know, father. And, you know, father is an archetype. And archetypes always have a positive pole and a negative pole. And so using the term to kind of equate with this sort of like oppression always just seems like it just huge leap over the incredible complexity of that concept. I mean, it's not that there, you know, it's not that there aren't aspects of being a woman that are pretty oppressive. You know, I just finished writing a book about it. So,
yeah.
But you know, it seems like such an oversimplification to just sort of say, you know, it's them. And
which also, you know, puts all the power in men.
Yeah.
That men are pulling all the strings, which then also gives a secondary signal that all the women have no agency, and that the only way women can be free is by somehow diminishing, infantilizing, kicking men out, because men are so powerful that if we don't kick them out, then we can't be ourselves. And that is an unfortunate bypass to the real task, which is how do the opposites come to peace with each other?
Yeah.
The opposites of masculine and feminine, of rich and poor, of have and have not, of all of the polarities that we suffer greatly because they're polarities, because they're opposites.
And the movie made a nice gesture, I thought. It wasn't all that well developed, but it was there. That, you know, that at the end there is a rapprochement, And Ken says, "Hey, sorry about us all, carrying on the way we were carrying on. That really wasn't very nice." And Barbie says, "Yeah, you know what? Sorry about, just sort of dissing you and never spending any time with you, and kind of treating you in a superficial, casual way." And so it does sort of hint at, a new possibility that is not the old, to call out an old trope, war between the sexes. That it's men and patriarchy and oppression, or women, or any of these polarities, as you're pointing out, that if we have an external world enemy, well, then we just don't have to confront ourselves.
Oh, that's great, Deb. That's really great.
Right? We just project it onto somebody else, or some other group, an ethnic group, a political group, somebody who's a different sex, a different socioeconomic strata. The list is endless.
And if we get rid of them, then we'll be free.
And that's actually in the movie, right? Because Ken is kind of pining after Barbie, and then she says to him, "You've got to go figure out who you are." And so I think that's to your point, that when we can focus on a person out there who's not giving us what we want, or that we feel oppressed by, or whatever, it is an avoidance of our interiority at some degree.
Yeah. And it's not to dismiss that there is oppression and injustice and unfairness and so on and so forth.
Of course
there is, but what we do with it is up to us.
Deb, I want to swing back to something that you had started to say early on, which really does also happen in the movie, which is the way dynamics change at the onset of puberty. Because part of what happens with Ken is that Ken goes into the real world, and his suspended puberty actually activates, and he goes through puberty. And then he comes back, and what he does is he brings puberty into the infantile world. And just as you were saying, then all of a sudden these roles, all of this sexualization starts happening in Barbie world, and these women are dressed in these more provocative sexual ways, and the boys are all dressing like gangsters, and there's all of this early stage sexual coupling behavior of who's going to play what role, and how does the erotic dynamic kind of come in. And I think what's unfortunate is, again, the disingenuous layer is that Ken has hypnotized all of the women and brainwashed them. But what's really going on, which happens to everybody, is that the awakening of sexuality brainwashes everybody. When all of that sexual tension wakes up, at 16 to maybe 28 years old, and the mating and pairing and all that primordial drive comes into the psyche. It takes years for people to be able to figure out who they are outside of just the mating drive. And there is a way in which both sexes get hypnotized with this pair bonding drive.
And I think that's really good, Joseph. And I think that because I did just this book is coming out in February. It's called The Vital Spark. I haven't really started promoting it yet.
Wonderful.
But I was thinking about some of the themes in the book when I was watching the movie, because like you're saying, there is a way that girls, I think, that females get pulled off a certain developmental trajectory when they get hit with puberty. Because they do, and perhaps boys do too. So I'm just saying for girls, girls are prepubertally, they're fierce, they're ferocious, they're fun, they're wild. And then puberty comes, and, they just, Deb, you were alluding to this earlier, something with your load and coat story, something kind of goes underground. And of course, we know that this is very much related to the development of shadow. You learn, it's not good to be wild and fierce and ferocious. That doesn't fit anymore. But, and some of this, again, is culture, I'm sure. But some of it is, you get estrogen, this surge of hormones in your system. And there's a certain kind of look, we're wired to reproduce, okay? And I would argue that girls are wired, and this is going to make me tremendously unpopular, but I think it's probably true that we're biologically programmed to reproduce. We all are. We wouldn't be here if the human race were not so programmed. But females in particular also are have a drive, let's say, or an instinct to nurture, to care for, and I think that thing, whatever that thing is, and however it gets expressed, is part of what shuts down this the natural effusiveness and vivaciousness and aggression and assertiveness. That's part of the light that goes out, is because that's tamped down, I'm sure, yes, because of culture. I don't disagree with that, but I think there may also be an innate process, because, as Joseph, to put it in your language, we find that we need to inhabit, of course unconsciously, we find that we need to inhabit Aphrodite, and eventually Demeter and Hestia.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. But what Ken brings, or Ryan Gosling brings, is Pan. That this sexless, infantile world of Barbie land is lacks any kind of sexuality. And what Ryan discovers in the real world, again, is purity. And so I guess my question with Lisa is, with the introduction of Pan, with the introduction of sexuality, is it that little girls or girls are somehow interrupted, or does some other primal initiative simply move them into another developmental process, deprioritizing some things, prioritizing others, and then around midlife, which is what Jung was saying, all of a sudden, like the mating stuff transitions, like you've got a home, you've maybe done your stuff with the kids, or like that other level of instinct begins to recede, and then all of this other archetypal life begins to pound on the door. And then again, in menopause, like another, like, make room, like that, the reproducing stuff is not the priority.
Well, the answer to that question is you can read my book, but Deb, you go ahead.
The vital spark. Don't worry, we'll talk more about it.
Yes,
absolutely.
On the podcast. But I'm thinking that I'm looping this back to Barbie, and a cultural fact in a lot of countries, Western countries, Japan, a number of countries, the birth rate is declining. And I think part of this revolution that is symbolized by Barbie, we can't really lay it all on this one little doll, but the promise is you can have it all. You can be beautiful, you can have a camper, you can have your own airplane, you can have your own jet ski, you can be a surgeon, you can be a rock star, and be beautiful and change clothes all the time. And so I think this may be starting to change, that there's a new mythology loose in a number of cultures where girls who then become teenagers, who then become young adults, are doing what those girls did at the very beginning of the movie and smashing their dolls and saying thanks but no thanks.
Well, is it a coincidence? Oh, this is going into really dicey territory. When, so Barbie came out in 1959. When was the pill invented?
The pill was
it like the late 60s or something? Or
it was certainly by the mid 60s.
Yeah. So I mean that's part of it too, right? Is that women
mid to late 60s? Yes.
Women can now choose to smash the baby doll and say, I don't choose this now.
That's right.
Yeah. 1960.
Yes.
Okay, now I'm going to duck. Wow, that's really interesting. So Barbie came out in 59, and the pill was introduced in 60?
I don't know exactly when, but I know that it was available when people were in college. Mm-hmm. And got it from Planned Parenthood. Mm-hmm. So you're right that it's Barbie slightly preceded this gynecological revolution.
Mm-hmm. But it might be the same thing arising in the culture.
Mm-hmm.
Which allowed sex to be decoupled from motherhood.
Yeah,
so that sex could have its own space and its own area of choosing.
Yeah.
Whereas we said archetypally that the activation of sexuality explicitly carried motherhood and fatherhood right in its wake sooner or later. Mm-hmm. Which of course that archetype is trying to punch its way back into the culture to actually take sexuality and force it back into this paradigm of motherhood and fatherhood.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, but...
Well, it didn't work. That was Freud's great discovery.
Right, it is not
that you
going
can repress
to work.
all this stuff, and then within a generation or so, it starts making people feel crazy. Mm-hmm. And they become symptomatic. And then there's this enantiodromia and a kind of revolution. The thing that troubles me in the movie is that sexuality is introduced into Barbie land. The hypnosis of the sexual demand is blamed on men as if women have no sexual interests.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
And actually should get rid of it because, it enslaves them. Either to motherhood or to men, which in a sense is the rise of Artemis. I mean, there is another archetype that is about not wanting to connect erotically to any male figure, but to stay within the community of women, and that's of course valid. So the rising of the feminine in that movie restores the world of the mother where everyone is sexless. So the president returns, who is the great mother. All the men are reduced to children again. And in that final scene, Ryan Gosling is going down a big pink slide, going, wee! And then he sheepishly, apologizes for, what he thought would be fun, and he didn't like being in charge of anything anyway, and it's best if other people are in charge. And then he's kind of dismissed. So what's been banished from Barbie land is sexuality and the possibility of coupling, that the world of only the mother with her children, who have now been restored to this kind of prepubescent child place, is better. Everybody plays nice, and they do. And the mother is going to keep things very nice and fair, and she will. But if we think of this as just a dream, not a political statement,
Right.
within a psyche, we would call that a regression.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That the tension, the war that happened in the movie didn't lead to an integrative experience and a new paradigm, that it simply went back into a regressive restoration of the childhood.
Yep.
And Barbie's advice to Ken is not just that you need to discover who you are, because that's not what she says, is you need to discover who you are that has nothing to do with me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That the new paradigm is, do not have a relationship with me. Do not have a relationship with women. Stay only in your singular psyche. And that's the path to what's going to make things better. And that ostensibly Barbie will, although her last scene is when she announces she's at the gynecologist's office. So I'm not sure what that says. But the reestablishment of bypassing the sexual conflict and confusion and craziness of all of that stuff, and that the better world is the one where sexuality really does not exist. And that's mirroring what's happening in the current culture.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true.
There's an attack on sexuality on all sides, whether it's the Supreme Court taking back the right to an abortion, and other states trying to claw back even the right for birth control. I mean, this happening from various sides. Well, this is an attack on sexuality.
I have more to say about that, but I think Deb wants to say something.
I think it's equally possible to see Barbie's statement to Ken of figure out who you are apart from me as a kind of a call to individuation. That poor old Ken has just been fixated on Barbie, and can he get close to Barbie? He can't even kiss Barbie. She rebuffs him in that scene.
Oh,
and
yeah.
So I think it's possible to see it as a call to, go ahead and be your own person, and that at the end, when she walks into the gynecologist's office, that it is her own sexuality. Obviously, she has the internal parts for a gynecologist to check out and examine. So I think the movie hints at development. I almost am kind of hoping for a sequel. I'd like to see. I'd like to see what happens next.
I'm sure you and the filmmaker both are hoping for a sequel now. And I have a feeling that we may just get our wish on that. But it's interesting, Joseph. I'm just sort of noodling here. I don't know that I'm really adding much. But, there's all this research that young people are not in relationships.
Right.
The number of people in relationships of certain ages have declined. The number of people married declined. But not just married. People are single more. Right. Kids are not having sex.
Right.
I mean, the teenage pregnancy has plummeted, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
But along with that, there's, young people are not having sex, they're not dating, or they're postponing it, they're doing it later. And it is really interesting. And there's a kind of, I'm really asking for it today, but I think there's a kind of new Puritanism that goes, and some of it's coming from the right, like the Supreme Court, but some of it's kind of coming from the left.
Absolutely.
With, this if someone can eye rape you, or he didn't,
I never heard of that.
Yeah.
That's really disturbing.
That's a thing.
Even a glance is enough to do harm.
So
that
so there's
vulnerability
the sense,
is
right?
Terrible.
So there's a sense that sort of any overture that's not explicitly wanted, requested, negotiated beforehand that it's okay, is seen as a kind of attack.
Right.
Oh my
So,
goodness.
I'm sure that must be part of why young, college students are not having sex as much, because, I think that the women have been taught to be afraid of it,
Right.
maybe
Right.
for good reason. I mean, terrible things happen. But I think the young men have been taught, like, be careful, because you could get accused of doing something. And there's a lot of room for misunderstanding there. But so it does feel, I think, that there is a bit of an attack on sex, we'll just say.
Exactly. From both sides, I absolutely agree with you. And that is part of the misunderstanding of the matriarchy, to be honest. Because the matriarchy, by its definition, is the return of the mother, as the patriarchy is the return of the father. And so if the mother rises in the collective, if that does happen, then we are all children again. That there's still a different paradigm where both sexes get to be adults and autonomous and interact with each other without having a parental figure monitoring them for their behavior and making sure that you're not doing anything in that bedroom over there or whatever the call is. So and I think that's a misunderstanding. I mean, that is happening in the collective, which is that sex is bad. And what I would say, Lisa, is it's not that young people aren't having sex. They're just not having sex with each other.
Oh, yeah.
And what's happening is putting people back into a certain Barbie state. It's driving things back into the inner world. It's driving it into this fantasy realm where young men are finding sexual fantasies in pornography, and if it wasn't there, it would be in their own imaginations that they would be retreating and in a fantastical place. So sex is going to find its way. It's going to break the door down and create ways to survive, but they're not necessarily good ways.
And I just want to kind of come in with what Deb said a minute ago. That I think in terms of that, the ending of the movie, if we think about the telos, I mean, it's good to become real.
Absolutely.
And she does have the parts, and I sort of think I appreciate your take on it, Joseph, but I think I was a little bit more with Deb, like, yeah, Barbie needs to figure out who she is, and Ken needs to go figure out who he is, and then maybe they could have a mature relationship. So I'm with Deb. I'll wait for the sequel.
And they could even have sex.
They could. There is the paradigm of the friend, which actually, there's a hint here, which I don't know whether it was thoughtfully done, but I think it is the emergence of the possibility, which has not come into the culture adequately, which is the archetype of the sibling. And first of all, there are no siblings in that movie. There's no children. There's no parents in that movie.
Although Barbie does have 3 sisters.
Really? Who are the sisters in the movie?
Barbie, and Barbie.
There's a little allusion to Skipper, who is one of her sisters, but it's really not made clear in the movie. But in Mattel land, out there with kids everywhere, Barbie does have siblings. But you're right. In the movie, it's really not there.
Yeah, they're all magically created. So when Barbie apologizes for taking Ken for granted, and Ken says, "Without your gaze, I'm nothing." So we're in a realm that Jung wrote a lot about, which is the anima projection. That there is a call for men to realize that they are projecting massive amounts of their own soul onto women. Now, in this scenario, women projecting parts of their soul on men, is not acceptable. So men are removed. And the fact that men pine for women or project their soul on women is now considered a problem, or perhaps even pathologic, which is an interesting thing, taking the politics out of it. But this natural process of projecting the contrasexual onto the beloved other, and to interfere with that projection prematurely, because Jung was really clear that as we become older, we integrate shadow, then we integrate what we've projected onto men and women, and we earn our place into a kind of friendship, into a balance, which I think again has something to do with the sibling archetype, that men and women see each other as brothers and sisters who are working, to a common support of, quote unquote, the family of society. But to not allow children to go through the stages of projection and recollection, that's going to have unintended consequences. And I think, going back to what you were saying, Lisa, is there seems to be a thwarted developmental process in younger people, that whatever would draw them into relationships has been interrupted. And according to Jung, what draws people into relationships is the projection of the anima animus. And if there is now a story that projection is dangerous, poisonous, repugnant, foolish,
or just unnecessary,
if it was that logical, it'll be interesting to see how human beings, or the human psyche, will it adapt? Is there really a new way of doing this? Or will we wind up back in that kind of Victorian world that Freud entered into, where people become remarkably unwell because the natural developmental process has been thwarted? And I don't know. We'll find out, in our generation.
I would like to go back to the movie before we switch to a dream. And also, what we haven't said is that it's such a spoof. There is a lightness and there is fun. And it was fun for me, too, to be in a movie theater and be surrounded by other people laughing or making comments. It's certainly gotten the three of us thinking, and I'm sure lots of other people. But I'd like to end today's discussion with just a salute and a bow to the fun of it, that this does not have to be heavy duty, kinds of stuff, that we can carry it all with a kind of lightness. And wouldn't that do an awful lot of the world some good?
This movie is part of a really fun genre called Kindercamp, which is this where these nostalgic images from our childhood are then brought up in Hollywood into this really campy, exaggerated place. But interestingly, there are these various adult jokes that are inserted into it. They did this with the Addams Family. They did it with Scooby-Doo. They did it with Josie and the Pussycats. That all of this nostalgic stuff from our childhood has been brought upward into these movies, and creates this amalgam of our nostalgia with our current cultural sense of humor, if nothing else.
Yes.
And there's something in that we delight in.
Yeah. I mean, it's a movie. It's a summer movie. It's fun.
Yes.
I'm a little salty about it being an advertisement, 2 hours of product placement for Mattel, but I can set that aside and just say it's fun, and it's okay to have fun. And I hope that all of you have had fun with us listening to this. I was thinking this is going to be a highly unusual Barbie podcast. I don't think we've repeated other efforts to examine the film here. So I hope you enjoyed it.
Yep. And keep your eye out for that Jungian analyst doll. It's coming to a store near you soon.
It is, totally.
Okay, let's switch to a dream.
Today's dream, it comes from a 62-year-old woman who works as a park ranger and musician. And she's titling her dream, Making Snow. And here's the dream. I'm in the hallway of my new rental place. I see my new flatmate. He is vacuuming the hallway carpet. I see a small amount of white dust he sprinkles on the carpet. As he vacuums, the dust keeps growing and growing. I realize it's actually snow. It keeps billowing out of the vacuum cleaner, and soon it becomes clouds of snow. The more he vacuums, the more snow he makes. We both grab some snow, and we both make snowballs. Then we start throwing snowballs and have a snowball fight. Then I wake up. And here's the context. I moved in recently to this house. It looks over the city and the southern Alps. I had a car accident last year. A young woman was speeding around the corner and lost control of the car, and she plowed into my work vehicle. Because of this incident, I now need a hip replacement, but I have dysplasia, and because I'm older, this will not be paid for, and it's considered a non-work injury. So I sold my little place so that I could get the new hip. My flatmate is South African. The day before I had the dream, he asked me if I knew what the dust on top of the toilet system was. He said, "Come have a look." I followed him, and he pointed to a little clump of white dusty stuff. I said, "I have no idea what that is." I couldn't understand why he didn't just wipe it off. He explained about how it looked like grouting, but nothing he could see had been fixed. It didn't bother me. I got the cloth and wiped it away. And the feelings in the dream, she notes, it made me happy. I was having fun, and there was an incredible feeling of joy. And then just in terms of associations, she notes, after the dream, I told my flatmate about the dream. I wrote it in my dream book. Good for you. He just laughed. He flew back to South Africa to get married, then came back a week before his wife. She arrived late on a Friday evening. On the Saturday morning, we opened the curtains, and it was snowing. They went outside and had a snowball fight. They had never seen snow before. So speaking of fun movies, this is a fun dream.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about, what is snow? What is snow in the psyche? But first, what does it bring up in me? And I think in a lot of people, I know kids in school that as teachers, if it started snowing, the whole classroom was excited. And oh, it's snowing, look, it's snowing.
It's magic.
It's magic. It's exciting. And that every snowflake is different. And I know we all went outside when we found this out with pieces of black cloth or black paper to quick see the snowflakes design before it melted. So there is something delightful, which is well imaged in the dream, about snow. And I wonder if it's the antidote or the compensatory
Exactly, yes.
process for, first of all, vacuuming, which is the most mundane, pedestrian chore. And there is some kind of carpet cleaner that you can sprinkle on a carpet to, I guess it helps clean, obviously. I don't use this product. But from something really banal of vacuuming comes the magic. And in her waking life, she's having a hard time.
Mm-hmm.
There was a car accident that was not her fault.
Mm-hmm.
And she has a hip problem as a result of it that her insurance won't pay. And
she had to sell her house.
She had to. It's really hard.
Yeah.
And that Psyche has gifted her with something delightful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a little fantasy about this dream. I'm obviously just making it up, but she's obviously at a kind of place of transition. She's had to move into this flat. She's living with these flatmates. And there can be a way that when you become an older person, that it feels like you're supposed to feel like life is kind of, over or not over, but on a kind of steady path. like you know what you're going to be doing, And the truth is that when there is some disruption later in life, it can be very heavy and difficult. But it also, there's a little thrill to it because suddenly things are not the way you thought they were going to be. I mean, when you're 20, unless you're in a very kind of rigid, stratified career process, it's like, oh, what will I be doing in 2 years? I don't even know. But by the time you're in your 50s or 60s, it's like you've got your nose to the grindstone and you pretty much know what you're going to be doing in 1 or 2 years. But this woman's life has been somewhat turned upside down by this accident, it sounds like, and she's in a very new situation with new people. And that kind of, in a way, can be somewhat thrilling. I mean, it's so interesting that the flatmate, they've never seen snow before, and how magical that is. If you've come to adulthood and you've never seen snow, it's like, what? What is that? But she's having a little bit of like, wow, maybe I didn't really expect to be here. And maybe there is a sense of adventure and discovery amidst this new situation, even though it's very difficult.
Yeah.
I'd like to add an additional lens. I'm just thinking about a more realistic interpretation that what does it mean to vacuum a carpet, and when do people sprinkle things on carpets?
Okay.
So because there are products that people sprinkle on their carpet to freshen it, allegedly to clean it, to get fleas out of it, and the vacuum is really sucking up the dirt. So there's also something very positive about being playful with the dirt.
That's nice, yeah.
And that could have something to do with being at that age where realizing your shadow can be fun. And that being able to be playful with the stuff that's ground into the carpet of the psyche can actually create an incredible place of joy, where early in life we're just terrified of our shadow. But all of a sudden, putting on that red coat or having the snowball fight, actually what's in the carpet is play.
Yeah.
And I kind of wonder
That's nice.
whether that had been ground down into the carpet by life, by working all the time, by just having to deal with money and surgery and car accidents. That there's not that play goes into the shadow. And there's something about this animus figure where it's able to suck that out of the ground, accumulated, and the spirit of place is still alive even in the midst of these great difficulties.
Yeah, I really like that a lot, Joseph. That's really great, and I think right on.
Yeah,
from something so pedestrian comes something delightful. It's an anchiodromia that out of the one thing emerges something else.
And something that's delightful and full of possibility, because you can mold snow into all kinds of different shapes, and there's all these different ways that you can engage with it. And Deb, just to go back to something you said a minute ago, you touched on this important word compensatory, which I think is absolutely there, right? The dream, kind of offers a different experience in some sense than you're having in waking life. So perhaps she's really suffering. The dream gives her this image of joy, and dreams will do that for us. Sometimes when we're going through something really difficult, we'll get this absurd, silly, wonderful, fun dream, and it's almost like the dream maker is gifting us just a little reprieve from our suffering. But dreams can be fun, and they can be joyful, and they can be funny, and I just thought this was a lovely example of that. Yeah. So it's kind of like the summer blockbuster movie of dreams.
Yes, it is.
You've been listening to This Jungian Life. From our website, thisjungianlife.com, you can follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, help us produce future episodes by funding us through Patreon, and submit your dreams for possible interpretation on another episode. We'd like to thank our listener who shared a dream for today's show and hope you'll let us know what topics you'd enjoy hearing more about. Until next time, keep living this Jungian life.